We've reached the business end of the schedule. That's right, Week 10, and it is November. Welcome back to the Phil Steele Show. Kyle Schassburger on Twitter at Kyle Schass, the Lock Doctor at Trip Hurd, and Phil Steele, the unicorn, the man, the myth, the legend himself, is with us as always at Phil Steele 042. The weather is turning. I told Phil right before I hit record it was around 25 degrees this morning in Winston-Salem as I was awaking from my deep slumber. But Phil, the games mean more. We're on the heels of our first set of CFP rankings. I know you don't give a rat behind about that. None of us do, really, who are doing this show. But bound to be some upsets this month. The games just, again, they hold so much more weight, so much more magnitude. And, hey, action returned this week. We had snow up in Toledo in your neck of the woods. I know that warms your heart, Phil. And, two, if anybody has gotten on the wagon that has been Phil Steele over the last month, his power plays, his top 3 picks over the last 4 weeks, Phil, you've gone 9-3. We could take our daughters to see Taylor Swift in all 4 or 5 time zones across the country.
There you go. Yeah, it's been a good 4 weeks. Let's hope it continues. We got 4 weeks left of football. Let's match that these final 4 weeks.
Tripp, you covered with FSU, of course, but you took one on the chin this past week with Virginia, again, scratching and clawing and getting Miami to overtime. That one was painful for you.
That was brutal. I love the under in that game.
Ooh.
And, I mean, what was it, 10-3 at halftime? They picked up the pace a little bit in the second half, but we're still just on a great track. Miami kicked a couple of really long field goals in that fourth quarter, too, just to get to overtime, where the game eventually went over. And then Thursday, just to make it worse, on Thursday night, I fall asleep on the couch. I wake up to watch the Lakers miss their cover by 1.2. So thanks for nothing, LeBron.
That'll be the last mention of the association here today. Phil, there's 5 games between now and Saturday. As I mentioned, we've already had some action, but 3 on Thursday night slate. We're going to hit them all, a couple on Friday as well, and we will start with Wake Forest and Duke on Thursday night, 7:30 game on ESPN. Now, the Blue Devils opened up. My records showed around 12.5-point favorite, but this line has been dropping fast and steadily. Last check has the Blue Devils as just a 6-point favorite at home. The over-under is 41.5. Again, ESPN ball game. I'm going to be there, Phil. I'm going to be in the booth. Dave Clawson against Mike Elko. These two know each other very well. 12 years together. Fordham, Richmond, Bowling Green, Wake Forest. Elko is the DC there. It can get nasty when these two meet on the gridiron, but you wonder, maybe the line's dropping again. Questions about the health of Riley Leonard.
Yeah, and you have to almost think that, I've followed lines for a long time, and for a line to drop from like 9 to 6.5 everywhere in a moment's or in 10 to 15 minute notice, that's generally a sign something happened. So you got to think Riley Leonard might not play tonight. If he did play, I think Duke is the better team. They've got the defensive edge, no doubt about that, holding opponents to 50 yards per game below their season average. They've got the run game with Waters and Moore. And then, of course, Riley Leonard. But if he's out for this one, Wake's a scrappy team. They somehow beat Pitt 2 weeks ago, a game where Pitt got ruled for that slide. Florida State got a touchdown in the fourth quarter to get past the spread last week. I'd have to lean with Wake plus the points, but probably one I'm going to stay away from because I liked Wake a lot better at plus 12.5. Not so wild about it at plus 6.5.
All right, Phil, let's talk TCU at Texas Tech. The Red Raiders favored by a field goal in this one, 7 p.m. kick Thursday night. First trip to Lubbock with Sonny Dykes as the head coach for TCU. Reading about this game, his father, Spike Dykes, won 82 games at Texas Tech from 1986 to 99. I said, Spike Dykes, that's just the coolest name I've ever heard. I had to look and see what this guy, I had to get a look at this guy. I go to Google. First picture I see is this big picture of Mac Brown. So Google, let's do a little bit better when give Coach Dykes his respect here. All right, TCU coming into this one, they rank 71st in opponents' yards per rush. That's going to be a problem against Taj Brooks. The Red Raiders might also get Morton back at quarterback tonight. They're talking about that. Both these teams are off a bye. It's a coin flip spread. What do you like here, Phil?
Yeah, and I think, following the two teams closely all year, I just think TCU is the better team. Josh Hoover's the backup quarterback, but when I talked to Coach Dykes, Coach Dykes prior or after the fall or after the spring was over, he said he had confidence in all his quarterbacks, and I liked what Hoover did in his first start against BYU, throwing for 447 yards. Now, Texas Tech always plays much better at home than they do on the road. And that game against Kansas State, they were down to Jake Strong at QB. I do think Morton has a good chance of returning tonight. Those would be the negatives if you're picking TCU tonight. But I like the fact that, to me, the better team is getting points. So I'm going to take TCU plus the points and call for them to pull the outright upset here.
Phil, final game on Thursday, another 7:30 contest in the Sun Belt. South Alabama is visiting Troy. Last check, have the men of Troy favored by 5 points. 45 is the total, again, 7:30 on ESPN2. Troy has covered 5 straight against their in-state rivals. If you remember a year ago, that rock fight of a game, they were 3-point dogs. They won 10-6 in Mobile last year. Troy and USA. What do you think of this matchup? I think there might be some more points. 45 is the total. I don't think we're going to get the same 10-6 matchup we had a year ago.
Yeah, probably more than I'd go over 16 in that one, Kyle. For this one, when I look at it, Troy's playing really good football right now. I like the way they had a dominant second half against Texas State, but it was 14-13 after 3 quarters. They tacked on 17 points in the fourth quarter last week. And while South Alabama lost by 13 at Louisiana, they actually had a 150-yard edge in that game. They were -5 in turnovers. Now, Carter Bradley got injured at the end of the game. I do expect him back this week. He's hitting 66% with a 13-7 ratio. You got 2 really good running backs in this game. LaDamian Webb, 674 yards. He's averaging close to 6 yards a carry. Same thing with Kamani Vidal, who, of course, came on strong last year. He has 994 yards. I think the defenses are close. Give a slight edge there to Troy. Very slight edge. I think South Alabama is holding opponents to 81 yards per game below the season average. Troy's at 90, so it's tight there. I think it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out thing. I'm going to take South Alabama plus the points. I think if one team wins this game, it's probably by 3, so I like the underdog.
Don't look now. Boston College has won 4 games in a row, but they're a road dog tomorrow night when they travel to Syracuse. The Orange favored by 2.5 in this one. Q's still winless in the ACC. They've lost their last 4 games by a total of 150-34. And that's not good because typically they do keep score these days in college football. This is going to be the 3rd road game out of the last 4 games for Boston College. Syracuse, this is their first time at home since September 30th. I'm a little surprised. I thought maybe Boston College could come out as the favorite here in the opening line. Phil, what do you like between the Orange and the Eagles?
I do think Boston College is the better team. I think when you look at the 2 teams, especially what you touched on, Tripp, is the last 4 weeks. Over the last 4 weeks, Boston College is plus 132 yards per game. They're playing to an average game grade of 105.5. Meanwhile, Syracuse, now keep in mind, Syracuse did play Clemson, North Carolina, Florida State, but last week they played Virginia Tech and were non-competitive. It was all VT in that game. Over the last 4 weeks, they're minus 298 yards per game and play to an average game grade of 85. So clearly, if you look at these 2 teams in their current form, Boston College, as you pointed out, Tripp, should be favored in this game. I think they're the better team. And I like what Thomas Castellano said 2 weeks ago after they beat Georgia Tech. He didn't say, well, this is good. We're scraping to get to a bowl. He said, our goal is 9-3 this year. And I think you're going to see Boston College play really well down the stretch. They've got Virginia Tech next week, Pitt, Miami of Florida. Maybe they get to that 9-3. I like the underdog, Boston College, here as a pretty good play this week.
Colorado State is visiting Wyoming. This is the final of 2 games on Friday, Phil. The Cowboys are laying 7 points, 41.5 is the total, 8 o'clock on CBS Sports Network. They're playing for the Bronze Boot. Another great rivalry trophy. Wyoming has beaten Colorado State more times than any other team. Your magazine points that out. Again, the Phil Steele College Football Preview. I know it's November, but you can still get one of these bad boys. Go to philsteele.com for more information. Wyoming has won 6 of 7 overall against Colorado State, 5-2 against the spread. Could get up into the 60s, but, by the start of this game, it's going to be dropping. Could hit 38, 39 degrees. No snow, though. Light winds. Colorado State and Wyoming, the Rams catching a touchdown.
Yeah, and in this one, normally Wyoming's got a large edge. Altitude, home field, but Colorado State's used to the altitude as well, so not as big an altitude edge. And what the heck happened to Wyoming last week? I mean,
Man.
you expected a competitive game against Boise State, and the first downs were 24-8. They got outgained 443 to 112. That was really a bad game. I would expect a bounce back. Harrison Whaley, their top running back, who was just lighting it up. He got injured 2 games ago. Last week, he only had 10 carries for 18 yards. I would expect a better performance from him now that he's another week away from that injury. And Peasley's having a solid year at QB with 13-3 ratio. But, go back to that Air Force game last week. Colorado State was tied 13-13. It's close into the fourth quarter. They ended up losing by 17, but they actually outgained Air Force in the snow by 46 yards. I thought they gave UNLV a great game 2 weeks ago. Probably could have beaten a very good UNLV team. This is a scrappy Colorado State bunch. Braden Fowler Nicolzi is having a good year throwing. He's got to cut down the interceptions. He's got a 16-11 ratio. But I like the way Colorado State's playing. I like Wyoming to win the game, but I'm going to take a full touchdown with Colorado State. They're a very scrappy bunch this year.
All right, let's head to noon on Saturday. Tough game for Texas coming up. They've got a ranked-on-ranked showdown. Kansas State checking in at 25 in the polls. They're going to be in Austin taking on the 7th-ranked Longhorns. Texas -4 is the line right now. The total sitting at 49.5. Texas hasn't lost to Kansas State since 2016. In the last 10 meetings, they're 8-2 straight up. For me, it's a little bit of a slight lean towards K-State in this one. I think they're capable. If they bring their A game, I think they could win outright. But it's really tough because Texas, even with a backup quarterback, all those weapons out there, Murphy, Mitchell, and you can always just turn around and hand that thing to Jonathan Brooks. What do you like here, Phil?
Yeah, I think, if you've watched the two teams, let's say the last 2 weeks, you're going to go with Kansas State plus the points. I mean, they blew out TCU, blew out Houston. Meanwhile, Texas barely got by Houston. And last week, they weren't as impressive as 35-6. I expected them to be more dominant last week. I used Texas as a best bet in my Inside the Press Box newsletter, and I was actually concerned about the game in the fourth quarter where I didn't think I would be. Malik Murphy didn't look great, had an interception, had a fumble. And like I said, K-State's just playing great. But let's take a look at Kansas State on the road this year. They went at Missouri and lost. And I think Texas is a better team than Missouri. They went at Oklahoma State and lost. And the Texas Tech game was more the fact that Texas Tech was down their number 3 quarterback and turned it over. They were -3 in turnovers in that game. Then Kansas State absolutely dominating the game. Meanwhile, this is Texas. They're at home. And as you pointed out, Tripp, this is a team where if you look at their running backs, you look at their offensive line, you look at the receivers, defensive line, linebackers, DB, it's one of the best teams in football. And I would expect Malik Murphy, second week as a starter, to have a better effort this week. It's at home, and the spread's cheap. They're only laying 4. I would pretty much take Texas against almost anybody at home. They went into Alabama earlier this year, came out with a 10-point win. So as much as my original assessment looking at the game was to take K-State, I'm actually going with Texas minus the 4 in this one.
Should be a fantastic game. One of 4 ranked-on-ranked matchups this weekend. 2 of them coming in the 3:30 window. Let's jump to Death Valley. It'll be Notre Dame seeking a second win in 3 trips ever at Clemson, coming off the beatdown of Pitt, where they blew the doors off the Panthers. And really, it should have been by even more points, I thought. 58-7 was the total. There was some mismanagement down the stretch at the end of the first half that really had me scratching my head as a Notre Dame Golden Domer with Marcus Freeman and the way he was managing that offense. But nonetheless, scoring across multiple phases, convincingly winning at home. Remember, they beat Clemson, a top 5 team, 35-14, sending the Tigers to their first loss last year in South Bend. And really, it's kind of been spiraling out of control, as many Clemson fans would say, as they evaluate their program. And Dabo Swinney, Phil, I'm sure you saw the clip from this week at his radio show, getting very sensitive with some of his callers. I forget the young man's name in particular, but Dabo basically said, hey, you come apply for this job. So the heat is on, Dabo. There's no question. Notre Dame is favored by 3 on the road. 44.5 is the total, 12 o'clock on ABC. What do you think?
I put out on my X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, this week, an interesting stat. Clemson's 4 losses this year. They have actually had a 94-60 first down edge. Last week, another one, 21-9 first downs. They lost. Miami of Florida, they led that thing by 2 scores in the fourth quarter, lost in overtime. Florida State didn't trail in regulation, lost. And then, of course, the Duke game was a game where they just blew numerous opportunities inside the 5-yard line. So 94-60 first downs, and you had 4 losses off that. I wonder about Clemson's mindset. I mean, this is a team that was expected to contend for the ACC, and now they've got 4 losses. Even if you win out, what's going on? What I'm going to call for here is not a pick on the side. I think I'm going to say Clemson has the first down edge. Clemson has the yardage edge. I mean, it's in Death Valley. They're playing with revenge. Notre Dame probably wins a game, but if they win the game by how much? I'm going to go with the under 45.5 is the way to go in this one. You've got a Clemson defense that's holding opponents to 83 yards per game below their season average. Notre Dame's holding opponents to 79 yards per game below their season average. And both of these offenses, granted, Notre Dame put up a lot of points last week, but there was fumble returns for touchdowns, punt return touchdowns. That's been fueling them. I think we've got 2 teams with really good defenses. So I'm going to go under in this game and avoid a side play because it's just too confusing with this Clemson team.
All right, let's get to the SEC. We've got the Hogs in the swamp this week. Arkansas taking on Florida. The Gators favored by 6 in this one. And Florida better win this game if they want to make a bowl because their next 3 up at LSU, at Missouri, and then they get to come back home, but they've got Florida State to wrap up the regular season in their last game. Arkansas, on the other hand, they're coming off a bye here. The new offensive coordinator, Kenny Guyton, they can't do much worse than their last time out because they only scored 3 points when they lost at home to Mississippi State. What do you think happens here, Phil?
Yeah, and speaking of a team that can't afford a loss to make it to a bowl game, that's Arkansas. And while they're 2-6, if they come into the swamp and win, next week they're host Auburn, they'll be favored. They host FIU, they'll be favored. They host Missouri, and I can see them winning that game, especially if they're on a 3-game win streak. So both of these teams really need this win this week. And the thing that I look at with Arkansas was they played the most grueling stretch in the country, going at LSU, Texas A&M away from home, at Ole Miss, at Alabama. That's 4 of the top teams in the SEC, all away from home. They got beat up. They had hardly anything left in the tank for that Mississippi State game at home. Tough game offensively. They ended up losing that 7-3, but the defense has been playing well all year, holding opponents to 47 yards per game below their season average. And they've been scrappy. I mean, they lost at Bama by 3. They lost at Ole Miss by 7. They lost to LSU by 3. So they can keep it under the number. They're fresh. They still have a bowl at bowl. But if I'm Coach Pittman, I can convince my team we got a shot at a bowl. And Florida's one of those up and down teams. They haven't been overly impressive in too many games this year. They've had a lot of games that have been close. Even the South Carolina win, you didn't think they were going to get it. They needed some 4th down conversions at the end to pull it out. So I'm going to take Arkansas plus the points in this one.
Ooh, love it. Arkansas and Florida rarely get together. This is just the 13th meeting all time. Florida owns a 10-2 advantage. They've won 5 games, all 5 in the swamp, beating Arkansas by 115 points. That's 23 per game. Again, 10-2 edge in the series. Florida and Arkansas coming up at 12 noon on Saturday. Nebraska and Michigan State, Phil. Sparty is catching 3 points at home, 12 o'clock game on FS1. This Nebraska team, man, I hadn't realized 3 wins in a row. That hasn't happened since 2016 for the Cornhuskers. So they're riding a 3-game win streak to take on a Michigan State team in East Lansing that is over in the Big Ten. They're 0-5. Last 4 meetings between these two has been decided by 12 points. So these two, whenever they get together, it promises to at least be tight. Will that be the case on Saturday?
I think it'll be a good game, but I still like Nebraska minus the 3 in this one. When you look at the Huskers, Matt Rule's doing a really good job. They actually have a really good head coach now, something that they might not have had the previous couple of years. And defensively, they're holding opponents on a year to just 290 yards per game in conference play, holding them to 72 yards per game below the season average. Great defense. Their problem is turnovers. I mean, they benched Jeff Sims because he fumbled the ball too much. And last week, Harburg fumbles the ball twice inside his own 25. They bring Sims off the bench. Sims fumbles, and Purdue returns it for a touchdown. If not for that, Purdue might not have scored in that game. They only had 10 first downs against this defense. Meanwhile, Michigan State, you just got to wonder what the mindset is. I mean, you're going nowhere. You've got an interim head coach who is going to be our head coach next year. You've got Ohio State and Penn State upcoming, so they have no hope of a bowl game. They used their 3rd-string quarterback, Sam Leavitt, last week. He moved them on a drive. do you start Sam Leavitt here? And if they do, you're talking about a third-string quarterback against Nebraska's defense. Nebraska's got to hold on to the ball. I think they will. Nebraska got a large defensive edge. They're playing solidly. I like Nebraska to win this one by more than a field goal here.
All right, Phil, Arizona State. They've covered in 4 out of their last 5 games. The one they didn't cover was a push against Colorado. They're going to have another tall test. They're going on the road to 18th ranked Utah. We know Utah doesn't lose at home, even though they did last week. So that doesn't really help the case for ASU right here. But Kenny Dillingham, he got his first Pac-12 win last week over Washington State. Do you give them any chance with 10.5 points of covering that spread at Rice-Eccles against a Utah team coming off a loss against Oregon?
You know what? I do. I just like this Arizona State team. As you recall, last week I liked them over Washington State. I used them on my Phil Steele Plus tour. The last 4 weeks actually said Arizona State was going to win outright. They did. I pointed out that, I believe I pointed out here on the Phil Steele show, that their defense, despite the fact that they came into that game with just 1 win on the season, was holding opponents to 87 yards per game below their season average, which was number 10 in the country or number 11 in the country. They're playing legitimate defense, and Trenton Bourquet throwing the football around. Now, I don't like going against Utah in Rice-Eccles Stadium. You know that. I talked about it for years. They're a much better team at home than they are on the road. They're off a loss. I don't like that. So this won't be one of my top plays of the week. But as long as you're getting over 10 points here, I think Arizona State, you just got to continue to ride them right now. Remember that Washington game 2 weeks ago? They played that game on the road in Husky Stadium. And if Washington doesn't get the interception return for a touchdown, Arizona State probably upsets Washington. So I just like the way the Sun Devils are playing right now.
Georgia Tech and Virginia. Man, the Cavaliers are playing better football the last couple of weeks. Knocking off UNC, getting Miami to overtime. We've talked about that already, and they're favored at home. 58 is the total. Georgia Tech, Ramblin' Rock coming in, catching 2 points in Charlottesville. Georgia Tech, it's kind of been a house of horrors for them at Scott Stadium. In recent history. 2 o'clock is the start on the CW network. Georgia Tech enters 2 wins away from bowl eligibility. Their first test in November is the Cavaliers, Phil.
Yeah, and the home team's dominated in this series, 21-5. Virginia's much better at home. I think they're something like 30-13 at home. Georgia Tech on the road is not very good. And then the other factors you have to throw in. First of all, Virginia is not your normal 2-6 team. I mean, they played NC State to the wire. They played Boston College to the wire. They played Miami of Florida to the wire, a game that they could easily have won, as Tripp pointed out, 50 and 49-yard field goals by Miami of Florida to tie it in the fourth quarter. They're playing good defense, holding opponents to 23 yards per game below their season average. Georgia Tech, meanwhile, is allowing opponents almost 70 yards per game above their season average. It's number 129 out of 133 teams. You can run the ball on them, which means Pierre Jones, Kobe Pace, Mike Hollins, all should have big games here. And Virginia's been better once Tony Muskett's returned at quarterback. The clincher for me in this one, liking Virginia, besides the last 4 weeks having them at a 13-point edge, is the fact that Georgia Tech does not play well off a win. In fact, I believe they're 1-5 against the spread off a win. You look at this year, they beat Wake Forest. The next week they lose to Bowling Green. They upset Miami. The next week they lose to Boston College. They upset North Carolina. I don't think they're going to play very well here. They're 0-3 this year off a win, and I like Virginia. Even though they're laying points here, I think last week Georgia Tech would have been a slight favorite. I'm going to take Virginia minus the points.
Georgia came out ready to play last week in the cocktail party. That game was never really in doubt after the second quarter or so. They're a 14.5-point favorite this week at home with Missouri coming to town. Look, we all know the rule. We talk about it every week, right? We have to like Missouri in this one. I mean, Georgia's off a big win. They're back at home. We don't like them as a home favorite. This game was really tight last year, too. 26-22 was the final in Como. But the one thing here, this is a really big spotlight on Missouri. I mean, this is a big game for them. So different kind of pressure here. And, you know, the crowd in Athens is going to be pretty rowdy for a 3:30 kick this coming Saturday.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head, Tripp. I mean, if you look at Georgia's record as a home favorite, they probably lose about 70% of the time, maybe 75. But that means they win 25 to 30% of the time. And if you go back and take a look at which games they win, it's the ones that Kirby Smart can really get this team motivated for. And you talk about motivation. Remember, let's go back to the Kentucky game. 5 weeks into the season, Kentucky's undefeated. Georgia's undefeated. Kentucky just ran the ball down the throat of Florida. Meanwhile, Georgia had allowed over 200 yards rushing to Auburn. So Kentucky's going to be able to run. They can pull the ups. No, forget about it. 51-13. Got them motivated for Kentucky. Wasn't even a game. Last week, Brock Bowers is out. Florida can keep this one close. No, forget about it. 43-20. Now you've got a Missouri team coming in at 7-1. Georgia's antennas up. They're ready for this one. And last year, remember when you followed this one, while Georgia had a large edge, they had a 481 to 294 yard edge, 28 to 14 first downs. They trailed almost the whole game. They needed a fourth quarter comeback to pull out the win. They will be highly motivated for this game against Missouri, who has a shot at knocking them off in the SEC East. I don't think so. I'm going to take Georgia minus the points. Georgia's actually a 67% play when they are taking on a ranked foe. And this is one where I'm sure Kirby Smart's got plenty of motivation to have Georgia playing its A game. Unlike the start of the year where they were poor as a home favorite against UT Martin, Ball State, South Carolina, UAB. This is a motivated game.
Let's go to Bedlam. Last time we have this one on the schedule is Oklahoma will depart and head to the SEC. Oklahoma State just playing a different sport the last month or so. They enter with 2 losses. Oklahoma coming off the upset loss in Lawrence, snapped an 18-game winning streak that they had over the Kansas Jayhawks. So Oklahoma trying to bounce back. OK State, who has struggled, historically all time against their rival, catching them here maybe in a vulnerable spot, and they might have the best player in America. I mean, Ollie Gordon II. 25 carries, 277 yards against Cincinnati, 291 the week before, 174 against Kansas, 140 against K-State, 124 against Iowa State. I mean, this man leads the country in rushing yards per, 20-yard carries, 30-yard carries, 40. The dude is insane. He's unstoppable. I mean, for that reason and that reason alone, the wagon that is Ollie Gordon II, I like them and their chances of handing Oklahoma a second straight defeat. Sooners come in favored by 6 on the road, 3:30.
Now, Kyle, sometimes I throw a question out to you, and it's tough, and maybe you can't answer it. This one I think is going to be a no-brainer. Who is the last Oklahoma State running back to have top 250 yards in back-to-back games?
I would say Barry Sanders.
There you go.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I thought I'd toss you an easy one this week, and naturally you nailed it. Ollie Gordon's been tremendous. In fact, I'm on the Doak Walker Award. I'm on every award committee for that factor, except for the Butkus. It's the only one I'm not on. Hey, Butkus, folks, get me on your award list, would you? But anyway, for the Doak Walker, the last couple of weeks, the guy that runs it usually sends us a list of all the candidates. And last couple of weeks, the question has been, do I need to send you a list of candidates, or do we just pick Ollie Gordon as the Doak Walker player? So that's how dominant he's been. And you remember a couple weeks ago, 4 weeks ago to be exact, we picked Oklahoma State over Kansas State. They delivered, picked Oklahoma State over Kansas. Second outright upset, picked Oklahoma State against West Virginia. And last week, they just buried Cincinnati. They were playing some good football. And it all happened since they settled on a quarterback. First 3 games of the season, they were running 3 different quarterbacks in there, settled on a quarterback against Iowa State, put up 409 yards on a really good defense. And I might add, it was in Jack Trice Stadium, so that was pretty good. And then since then, they've been 4-0. Oklahoma, I've been nonplussed with. Barely got past USF, barely got past Kansas. And this is a little bit of a major game, I would say, for Oklahoma State. They wanted this series to continue. They wanted to continue to play in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma said, you know what, since we're going to the SEC, forget about it. We're not going to play. So you think that Oklahoma State not going to be massively motivated for this last shot at Big Brother? And right now, they're just playing better football. So I think this game is one where Oklahoma State has a shot at an upset. And believe it or not, here's a nice stat for you. In the last 10 times Oklahoma State's been a home underdog, they have won 8 of them outright. So you might look at this game on the money line as well.
Interesting.
All right, to the ACC, Virginia Tech on the road at Louisville this week. The Hokies have a little momentum right now. They're over their last 4, averaging 30 a game with Kyron Drones at quarterback. They've covered in those games, more importantly. Louisville, though, at home, they're coming off a very impressive win over Duke last week. They've been very good at home, too. They're 5-0 against the spread this year at home, but it's November 2nd. Both of these teams, impressively, only one ACC loss apiece. They're both still alive for a spot in the title game in Charlotte. What do you like here in this one, Phil?
No, I would like the home team. So, I mean, if this game was in Blacksburg, Enter Sandman, I'd be taking Virginia Tech to pull the upset. But this game is not. It's in Louisville. And, in the Louisville games, all you have to do is take the home team. I believe it's 14 in a row for the home team. They've lost their road games this year, won all their games at home. And Virginia Tech is much the same. They have been outstanding at home. Remember, we talked about it last Thursday. How do you go against Enter Sandman? They just flat out dominated Syracuse. That wasn't even a ball game, 528 to 137. You talked about Kyron Drones coming in at QB. That has been the difference. Tootin's running the ball well as well with Drones, gives him a two-headed monster. But look at Virginia Tech's road games. They went into Rutgers, lost by 19. I think Louisville's a better team than Rutgers. They went into Marshall, lost by 7, and they got blown out by Florida State by 22. So they have struggled on the road. Louisville's a great team at home, just absolutely dominating teams at home, winning by an average of 30 points per game. The spread's cheap. I believe it's single digits, right? 9.5?
9.5, 10 is what I'm seeing. Yeah, I think I forgot to mention that off the bat.
Yeah, I would go with Louisville minus the 9.5. And like I said, if this game was in Blacksburg, I'd be taking Virginia Tech in this game. It's just two teams that play a lot better at home than they do on the road.
One of those guys that might be on that list for Doak Walker Award candidates, and we know it's Ollie Gordon at this point, going back a couple of games ago, would be Jawar Jordan. I mean, he had 21 carries, 163 yards on the ground, that 23-0 shutout of Duke at home, 9 straight wins at home now for the Cardinals. They've looked so impressive, Louisville, and what Jeff Brom has been able to do in year one since returning home. Reminder, Phil Steele Plus. Get more information at philsteele.com, but valued at $99. Bet smarter, not harder. Be more like Phil. Access to all the team pages is available. It's a $99 value. You get all the power ratings, special team rankings, injuries, transfers, just decades of material and data that is at your fingertips that will help you get ready for each and every weekend. So more information available at philsteele.com. Inside the press box as well, the newsletter with predictions for each and every game. All right, let's go to the Sun Belt, Phil. 23rd ranked James Madison hung on against Old Dominion this past week. They're still undefeated. They are laying 6 on the road. 54 is the total, 3:30 on ESPN2 in Atlanta, taking on Georgia State. That was one play that hit for me last week. I felt very strongly about Georgia Southern in that rivalry game. So in this spot, I think the Panthers are very angry, licking their wounds a little bit with the Dukes coming to town. They sense a big-time opportunity. I don't know, though. I'm still leaning JMU. I like what the Dukes have done. Again, being able to escape last week, and I have a feeling they can take care of business. What do you think about the Panthers at home against the Dukes?
Well, as you recall, Kyle, last week, Georgia State, Georgia Southern, I said, I don't know who I like. I deferred to you. You nailed it. I'm going to do that again today because I don't know who to like in this game. I mean, James Madison's been playing great, but I was leaning with James Madison over Old Dominion last week, and they were really disappointing. ODU had a great game against them. And at this point of the year, and I think you'll notice this, whereas I don't pay attention to the playoff thing at all, not even in the least bit. But the teams that are up there, that's what I call unbeaten pressure. They're unbeaten. They're hoping to stay up there. They're talking about where they're ranked. And in this case, James Madison might be talking about, can we run the table? Can we be, up there, even though they're not going to a bowl game? So unbeaten pressure is a legitimate thing. And as you mentioned, Georgia State is off a loss. Other than that, they played really good this year. They beat Marshall at home. They beat Louisiana on the road, which I thought was a good win. And the Troy game was closer than the final score would indicate. So once again, I'm going to pass on this game, and I'm going to bring it back to you, Kyle. You can reiterate your preference.
Yeah, I'm going with the Dukes. Georgia State, though, is off to their best start in program history, 6-2. They've done it one other time. So, to your point, Phil, they have played better. They're a strong team. They're not a force to be taken lightly. Third ever meeting between these two teams. JMU leads 2-0. Again, that game coming up on Saturday, 3:30 in Atlanta.
I don't feel the conviction in your heart on that, Kyle. I can tell when you really like a game.
Phil is talking me into it. I don't want to let him down. I gave him a winner last week with Georgia Southern in this game. So I don't have the same conviction. I probably would tuck my tail between my legs and stay away as well, Phil.
All right, another 3:30 kick. We've got number 21, Tulane, on the road at East Carolina. Tulane has laid 17 points in this game, the over-under at 46.5. Both these teams at opposite ends of the AAC standings. Both teams have not been very good against the spread this year either. I think Tulane's going to win this game, but on the road at Dowdy-Ficklen Stadium, 17, that feels like a big number for them to cover there.
Yeah, I've seen some 17 and a halves as well. So I mean, it's a big number for that. And what's the largest that Tulane has won a conference game by this year, guys?
7 points?
Can't be
12.
much.
Yeah,
12.
they
Oh,
actually
okay.
won by 12. But that would go right to Tripp's point of not being very good against the spread because Tulane's been a bigger favorite in most of those games. Now they do have a dynamite defense. Hurling opponents 101 yards per game below their season average, number 6 in the country. They've got the veteran quarterback in Michael Pratt. I love the way that Mekhi Hughes is running the football. It's a really good Tulane team. But go back to a couple weeks ago. East Carolina's playing SMU on a Friday. That thing was a 7-point game in the fourth quarter with about 7 minutes to go. SMU got a couple of late scores to make it a 31-10 game, but it was a lot closer than that. In fact, they had a 15-14 first down edge. The yards were almost even. And I think they had, 16 punts in the game, evenly split between the two teams. So they can play defense. East Carolina holding foes to 17 yards below their season average. Now, they got a very fortunate cover last week against UTSA, but that was on the road against a red-hot UTSA. This week, they're at home. They were just eliminated from the bowl prospects, but I think you're going to see East Carolina come into this one motivated. I hope they get better play out of their quarterbacks. They got Flynn and Garcia, who have combined for a 5-9 ratio this year, but I'm looking for East Carolina to keep this one a lot closer than expected.
I know Tripp is salivating over the game that he has next for you, Phil, but before we get there, Baylor and Houston. This game will be played at McLean Stadium in Waco. Both teams coming off losses. Embarrassing loss for Houston, 41-0 to Kansas State. Baylor falling to Iowa State, 30-18. Pair of 3-5 teams. Both teams give up a lot of points in Big 12 play, more than 30 plus. The over-under here is 58.5. So, as projected, not a lot of conviction or trust or confidence that this one can produce enough points, just simply because they're two bad teams. Houston should be able to run all over Baylor. Baylor might be able to exploit a weak Houston secondary. 3:30 on ESPN Plus. Baylor, the home team, is laying 3.5. Phil, they used to meet every year between 1976 and 95, as your magazine eloquently lays out, but this is their first meeting since 1995. Bears and Cougs. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, and ironically, they were supposed to meet in 2020, and at the last minute, Baylor called the game off, and Coach Holgerson put out on I think he put up on Twitter a picture of the truck for Houston being outside the stadium, and they're like, we're ready to play, but Baylor called it off at the last minute. So there probably is a little something going on Houston motivation-wise for this one. However, I know Baylor has been bad at home this year. In fact, they have 5 losses at home. They only beat Long Island, but they got to be better at home. Usually are good at home. They've got Blake Shapen. I think they're the better team. The reason the spread's 3.5 is the way Baylor's been playing as of late. But I guess losing to Iowa State, Texas Tech, Texas, Utah at home, not quite the same as losing to Houston. I'm going to go with Baylor minus the points in this one. I think the price is cheap at 3.5.
All right, Phil, they normally play baseball in Wrigley Field, but I think we might see a baseball score this week when we see Iowa take on Northwestern. Now, I had wrote down on my notes here the over-under for this game at 30.5. Some people, I've seen it at 29.5. As I check it right now in front of me, I'm seeing 31.5. So we're actually getting a little movement towards the over here. But Iowa, off a loss to Minnesota 2 weeks ago, only 127 yards of offense. They're still in a 4-way tie for the Big Ten West, though. And Northwestern last week, they beat Maryland 33-27. Quarterback Brendan Sullivan had a really nice game, 265 through the air with 2 touchdowns. I mean, we're playing a game of limbo here. How low can we go? I don't know if you like one side or the other. The spread is 5. I was giving up the 5. What do you like on the spread? And I also want your take on the over-under here.
Yeah, I would. I've got the projected score of the game. I'll answer your question right off the bat in both cases. I have the projected score of the game at 20-9. So that would lean with the under and definitely lean with Iowa. I think Northwestern's playing some great football. In fact, they have to consider David Ron as to take over as the head coach if they were to scrape out 2 more wins and get to a bowl game. And the possibilities are there with Purdue and Illinois, and even this game because they're playing good defense. But And I know Iowa is banged up on offense. I mean, Cade McNamara is not there. They've got Deacon Hill at quarterback. Deacon Hill's hitting 38% with a 2-3 ratio. Their top two receivers this year were both tight ends, where the strength of the team. Eric All and Luke Lachey, they're both out for the year. But LaShawn Williams, Caleb Johnson are a couple of guys that can run the football. I think they will be able to run the ball on Northwestern. And the interesting thing here is Iowa's won 6 games this year. The fewest amount of points they've won by is actually 6. You would think Iowa's got all these 3 and 1 point wins. No, every game is by 6 or more. So their defense, their special teams, and maybe their offense gets better with that run game. I'm actually going to lean a little bit with Iowa, but this won't be one of my top 5 or 6 plays of the week. That's for sure.
Big boy matchup as we head to the evening slate. Should be a thrilling one in Tuscaloosa. Bryant-Denny Stadium, the scene for number 13 LSU and 8th-ranked Alabama. We should double-check these rankings, at least for, the relative nature of what they symbolize and are supposed to represent from when I first put these on the dock earlier in the week. Yeah, Tigers 14th, Crimson Tide 8th. College football playoff implications, say what you want. LSU has an outside chance to work their way in. They'd have to win out, though, and Phil, I know what you're thinking. It'll all take care of itself, and I couldn't agree more. This should be a fantastic game. Tigers 6-2, 4-1 in the league. Alabama undefeated in the SEC. Again, controlling their own destiny, 7-1 overall. Alabama all-time at home. Just to note, in this series in Tuscaloosa, they do lead LSU 14-8. It was a instant classic a year ago in Baton Rouge, 32-31. LSU won in overtime. Line I'm seeing, Phil, is 3. So Alabama favored by a field goal at home, 60.5 is the total. And as customary, a CBS game, this one at night, 7:45.
Yeah, and to me, the 3 is the surprising part here because I think generally most people have Alabama ranked ahead of LSU. You would think at home field you probably have a 4-point edge of Bryant-Denny, and yet it's only 3 for this game. So it's telling me that there's a good amount of money going in on LSU. And I guess here would be the question. I'm going to ask both you guys. What do you prefer, offense or defense? Kyle?
Well, it seems like Alabama prefers defense. They're getting back to their roots a little bit more. I'm gonna answer, though, offense. What is Jaden Daniels going to be able to do against this Crimson Tide defense? That's the matchup I'm most excited for. So, yeah, offense. And LSU is as explosive as anyone in the country.
And Tripp?
Words right out of my mouth, Kyle. I mean, I feel the same way about Daniels. I think he might look. I kind of came into this one liking the over right off the bat. I don't know who's going to win the game. I think LSU can hang around, but LSU's defense has kind of struggled all year. Daniels, and I know what Alabama's like on defense, but Daniels can run around, make some plays. So if I had a play in this, I kind of lean towards the over a little bit.
Okay, fair enough. And, LSU's defense a little banged up in the cornerback's position and the defensive line. So that plays into that, especially when you look at the fact that Alabama's offensive weakness is the offensive line. They've given up 35 sacks this year. LSU only has 14 sacks all year, and they're missing one of their top defensive linemen, short at the hand at cornerback. So I don't think you'll see a lot of blitzes because they can't leave their cornerbacks one-on-one. So the over does look like a pretty decent play, but I like Bama here. I think Bama is the better team. You've got Nick Saban at home and Bryant-Denny. They're 16-7-1 as a home favorite. You've got the fact that Alabama is playing with legitimate revenge. When I say legitimate revenge, Saban is now 17-1 straight up getting revenge for his team that beat him the previous year. We saw that with Tennessee, and while that was close for a while, they did not only get the win, they got the cover. And I think the spread is something like it's about 80% at the time. But here, straight up win is going to get you the cover because they're only -3. So I like that factor. I think you're going to see an improved Bama offense in this one. So I do like your over in this one, Trip. But I definitely like Bama -3. I think they're the better team at home. This spread should be 6 or 7. I'm surprised the line is 3 in this one. I like the Tide with a much, much better defense. And I'm a defensive guy, by the way. So
yes, well. We know that. A couple of the offensive numbers, though, just to help you frame this one up even more. LSU leads the country in scoring offense at 47.4, total offense 553, passing TDs 26, first downs 217, best third down conversion percentage at 58.7, third in passing offense at 340, 13th in rushing offense at 213. They've got the leading receiver in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. Yes, those are 2 different guys. They've also topped the 500-yard mark for a school record 7 consecutive games. I mean, these are just mind-numbing statistics, though, for an LSU team that, normally we're talking about their defense. We know it's wide receiver in a sense, because the amount of wide receivers they've churned out. But other than the Joe Burrow year, I mean, when have we really seen, the offense, the top get popped off it like we've seen? Should be a fantastic game, though. Can't wait.
All right, 7:30 kick in the Coliseum between Washington and USC. Talk about overs. Here's another one I like, and I think you like this one too, Phil. I heard you talking with Wayne and Hartzell about this on the show earlier this week. I mean, if the over is not coming down in this game, it's going to be moving up and up throughout the week. I 1,000,000% agree with you on that. So right now I'm seeing 76.5. You might want to jump on it today if you can. I would play this thing over all the way up to like 112 though. I think this is going to be an absolute shootout. The fishy thing to me is, why is USC only a 3-point dog here? I know they're at home, but I mean, Washington, we've been talking about them all year. People think this might be the best team in the country. USC's coming off what could have easily been, if they had lost that game last week, a 3-game losing streak. So somebody out there thinks USC can win this game. Who do you like here?
Yeah, to me, as you mentioned, Trip, I like the over. I mean, you're looking at Caleb Williams on one side of the coin against an average Washington defense. And for the record, the best team in the Pac-12 is Oregon. I know they lost at Washington, but if Oregon played Washington on a neutral field, Oregon would be favored in that game. They've got the offense, they've got the defense, they've got the special teams. They outgained Washington by 126 yards in Husky Stadium with a 32-24 first down edge, and convert on one of those 3 fourth-down tries. They got stopped on. Oregon would have won the game outright. Like I said, if the two teams played again, Vegas and myself would have Oregon favored in the game. I think they're the best team in the Pac-12. But let's get back to this one. Washington the last 2 weeks, pretty fortunate to come out with wins. The Arizona State game, Arizona State's up. They go for it on 4th down. They didn't have enough guys on the offensive line to block for a field goal. They get intercepted, return for a touchdown. Washington escapes. Last week, they're playing Stanford. It's a 2-point game in the 4th quarter. They get a late touchdown. Washington escapes. And that was Stanford, for crying out loud. Same thing with USC. They look like crap against California. But I pointed out last week, if you look at their final 7 games this year, Notre Dame, Utah, California, Washington, Oregon, UCLA, what's the one game you're not up for? It would have been Cal, and it's when they barely survived. So I think USC is an outstanding home underdog. I believe they're 5-1. They've got the offensive firepower. They're the dog. I like the over the best, but then I would lean with USC plus the points.
Two super passionate fan bases colliding and proud programs, in their own right in Morgantown, with BYU visiting West Virginia. The Mountaineers are laying 10, 50.5 is the total, 7 o'clock game on FS1. Just two very unique, different cultures too, Phil, at the same time. I mean, I don't know where to begin with this other than, West Virginia got back in the win column against UCF. BYU was blown out by Texas, which most had anticipated. The Cougars have gone up and down every single week. They've alternated wins and losses for the most part. A pair of 5-3 teams. 10 seems large considering the records for these two teams. Do you think the Cougs can cover on the road?
No, I don't. I like West Virginia at home in this one for a couple of reasons, numerous reasons, I should say. Last week I pointed out, picking Texas over BYU, that BYU was 5-2, but it was the fakest 5-2 in the country. I mean, they were minus 100 yards, over 100 yards per game, winning games where they're out first down, outgained by large margins. And they came up, of course, short last week, 35-6. So that I didn't like about BYU. I don't think West Virginia is fake. West Virginia wins games the way I like teams to win games. It's with a solid run game. When I talked to Coach Brown after the spring, he said, Phil, everybody's got our offensive line underrated. Everybody's got our running backs underrated. And guess what? They were. And Donaldson's finally rounding into form. Had a really good game last week. They've got the freshman Jaheim White. Garrett Green is a dangerous runner at quarterback as well as passer. He's got a solid 8-2 ratio this year, hitting 53%. What's BYU's weakness on defense? It's run defense. In Big 12 play, they're giving up 5 yards per carry. So I like West Virginia to be able to run the ball on BYU. Now let's go to the flip side of the coin. BYU can't run the ball. They haven't all year. They got 81 yards on the ground per game, 2.9 yards per carry. Now, passing is where they live by. Keaton Slovis is a guy who's hitting 57% with a 12-6 ratio. West Virginia ranks in my top 40 in pass defense. So we got strength against their strength. I think we shut them down. And BYU is not the same team away from home that they are at home. Yeah, they beat Arkansas, but they were outgained by 143 yards. They got blasted by Kansas, blasted by TCU, blasted by Texas. This game is played all the way across the country. Their first trip to the East this time. I like West Virginia minus the 10 strongly in this one.
All right, Kansas. They're ranked number 22 in the country, coming off a big win over Oklahoma last week. Just what a crazy game. Tell you what, though, Jason Bean, I mean, there's plays. He looks so great. Looks like an NFL caliber quarterback. But on that last couple of drives, man, he threw a couple of balls straight to Oklahoma that they just didn't catch. But anyways, they survived. They get the win this week. They're on the road at Iowa State, 7 o'clock kick. And the Cyclones are favored by 2.5. Iowa State, really slow start to the season, 1-2 start. They have picked it up a lot here in the recent weeks, but they're still kind of overall picture of college football landscape. They're still under the radar right now. I was really hoping Kansas would be favored in this game and thinking maybe I could jump on the Cyclones as a little money line dog here. What do you like in this one, Phil?
Let's keep this Iowa State team quiet, okay, Trip?
Okay,
let's
keep the secret.
Because I'm liking the fact it's 2.5. Let's not let people know how good Iowa State is. And Jack Trice Stadium is one of the toughest venues to go play in. And at the start of the year, Iowa State was struggling at the line of scrimmage. Their offensive line, in the first 4 games, they were hardly being able to run the ball. But the last 4 games, they're averaging 4.8 yards per carry. Eli Sanders, Cartavius Norton, a couple of guys that are running the ball well. And Rocco Becht, each week, this guy just looks better and better. He's got a 13-6 ratio on the year. I like what I see there. Defensively, there's never a question with Iowa State. They're holding opponents to 67 yards per game below their season average. In fact, the last 4 weeks, 99 yards per game below their season average. Kansas's weakness, rush defense. They're giving up in Big 10 play or Big 12 play, 5.1 yards per carry. It's also pass defense. They're giving up 66% completions. In fact, Kansas, not holding opponents below their season average. They're giving opponents 45 yards per game above their season average. Yeah, they've got some offense, but as you correctly pointed out, Trip, they're off a big game. I like to go against teams off a big game. I'd be willing to lay 7 points in this one. I like Iowa State minus the 2.5, but let's keep this Iowa State team just between the 3 of us, okay?
Done.
Let's keep them quiet.
Yes.
Some Sunbelt gem here. I feel like more people need to be aware of what Texas State and Georgia Southern can provide us. You're talking about USC and Washington when it comes to an over. This one's at 70.5. Eagles beginning their first 2-game road swing of the year off that big win against Georgia State at home, which, gives me some pause here. I'm going to be real honest, Phil. And now that they're going on the road after an emotional, win in front of their home crowd at Paulson Stadium, this could be a letdown spot because Texas State, they've already proven themselves as a formidable opponent at times, knocking off Baylor, really manhandling Baylor. But this team scores 35 points per game. They lead the Sun Belt in scoring. They've got TJ Finley, a former SEC quarterback with a 15-5 ratio. 70.5, though, that's a lot of points. Georgia Southern is favored as we look at the side, 2.5 on the road here on Saturday night. What do you think?
It probably would have been closer to 76.5 had last week's score not happened. But last week they played a defensive team in Troy, and it was 14-13 heading into the fourth quarter. But I agree with you 100%, Kyle. This offense is something to watch with TJ Finley. Mahdi at running back he'll top 1,000 yards pretty soon. He's averaging 7.2 yards per carry. But this Georgia Southern offense is something as well. The only teams that have slowed him down were James Madison, Wisconsin. 2 really good defenses on the road. Other than that, Georgia Southern is putting up over 38 points per game. So I think Georgia Southern does get to the 40s in this one. Texas State's allowing opponents 30 yards above their season average. That would put Georgia Southern close to 500 yards. And Georgia Southern's allowing opponents 20 yards above their season average. That would put Texas State about 500 yards. As long as when they get in the red zone, they score touchdowns, they clear the 70.5 easily. So to me, one of the top plays here is the over. And other than that, I would lean with Georgia Southern. I just think they're the more advanced program at this point and capable of winning on the road. And the spread's cheap. What'd you say the spread was on this one?
2.5?
Yeah, 2.5. So I would lean with Georgia Southern. I like the over.
Yeah, I'll be tailing you on that over on Saturday, Phil. 7:30 kick in Ann Arbor Saturday night. Purdue taking on the Houston Astros. Wait a minute.
There's no trash
Hang
cans
on a
involved
minute.
here. All right.
Taking on Michigan. We won't even get into all that. There's been plenty of talk about it. But Michigan, I mean, I don't know how they're still undefeated. What a brutal schedule they've had. Michigan State last week, Indiana. All right, but look, they do. If you're looking for a reason to like Purdue at all, Michigan does have Penn State on deck. That's about all I've got for you on this game. The big spread, 33.5. What do you like here, Phil?
You know, Michigan's average Big Ten win so far, 40 points per game.
Yeah.
That Nebraska team we talked about earlier, they beat them by 38 on the road. They crushed Minnesota by 42 on the road. And, I mean, they've got the running backs with Corman Edwards. They've got the quarterback with J.J. McCarthy at nearly 80% with an 18-3 ratio. Got one of the best offensive lines in the country. They've got dangerous receivers with Wilson and Johnson and Loveland. They've got one of the best defenses in the country, holding opponents to 115 yards per game below their season average. And as much as Nebraska tried to give Purdue some offense last week with 2 fumbles inside their own 25 and a fumble return for a touchdown, Purdue could scrape together 14 points off that, 195 total yards. It's under 35 for this game, isn't it? What's the spread?
33 and a half.
33 and a half, yeah.
Why is it under 35? I'd head it towards 40. If it's under 38, I'm taking Michigan. So at 33 and a half, that's a good play. And as far as looking ahead to Penn State goes, these guys had a bye last week. They need to get in gear for Penn State. So I like Michigan minus the 33 and a half. That's cheap.
All right, makes sense to me. Let's squeeze in one more game in the evening slate before we go chasing. Miami on the road in Raleigh taking on NC State. State coming off a huge win over Clemson. Peyton Wilson just making plays all over the place, the linebacker for the Wolfpack. I love Dave Dorn sticking up for his team. I mean, he might end up getting in a fist fight with Steve Smith. We'll see. I don't like his odds in that very much, but I love what the coach did there. It's just living here. Growing up around the ACC my entire life, this just feels like a perfect spot for NC State to fall on its face. But they've got a little something going here lately. I mean, their defense, even though they're giving up points, we know they've got a decent defense, and they've had a little bit of a spark with the new quarterback in Morris. What do you like here, Phil?
Yeah, I think the insertion of MJ Morris really helped. Now, last week they did only have 9 first downs against Clemson. Once again, back to the fact Clemson's got the 94-60 first down edge in their 4 losses this year. I do think Miami of Florida is the better team. Tyler Van Dyke actually has not been great. I think he's got something like a 5-7 ratio to last 3 starts. So that's not overwhelming. They're going on the road. Miami's the type of team that tends to fall on its face at times as well. I love Peyton Wilson. I think could be the top linebacker in the country. If I was on the Butkus award list, the only award list I'm not, hate Butkus guys, I would vote for Peyton Wilson this week to be a finalist coming up. But I think State at home is a team that's very tough as an underdog, and they're 5-0 as an ACC home underdog. So I'm going to lean with State in this one, plus the points. Even though they haven't been overwhelming, I do think they keep this one closer than the spread.
All right, Phil, real quick. We've got 4 games late at night. We're going to talk about 2 of them. They're Stanford, Washington State. The Cougs are favored by 13.5 at home, 9 o'clock, Pac-12 Network. 16th-ranked Oregon State, laying 13.5 on the road at Colorado, 10 o'clock on ESPN. I want to know, though, about number 20 UCLA, laying 3 on the road at Arizona. Man, Jed Fish and those Wildcats are just playing so well. I mean, Arizona is back to being relevant. 10:30 game, a win for them, might even give them some votes to the top 25. But 10:30 on FS1. Bruins took care of Colorado at home on homecoming with some pretty sweet throwbacks. But they still turned the ball over. But I think they've settled on their quarterback in Ethan Garbers.
Yeah, and I thought they dominated Colorado much more than the final score to indicate. Colorado got that late score to cover, but in the first half, it was basically turnovers that it shouldn't have been that close of a game. I love UCLA's defense. Holding opponents 114 yards per game below their season average. That's number 3 in the country. You mentioned that Ethan Garbers has looked great. Carson Steele, sort of like that guy at running back from Ball State. He's having a good year as well. Arizona hasn't lost a game by more than 7, but the spread's very reasonable here at 3. Oregon State is a team that just can't win on the road. I don't feel the same way about UCLA. The 2 of the games that they lost on the road, 2 of the games they lost this year were both on the road, but they were against Utah in Rice-Eccles Stadium and Oregon State, which never loses in Reeser. This game's more winnable for them, so I like UCLA to go on the road and get the win minus the 3.
All right, what's the other one we want to talk
Trip,
about here, Kyle, before we
Boise
get off
State,
here?
Fresno.
All right, Boise and Fresno. Spread here. Fresno -3, 54.5 is the total. Oh, Boise State, they really helped me out last week. That was a 5-point spread, and they handled that pretty easily. That was one of the biggest no sweat locks out there that we had all week. What do you like here between Boise State and Fresno, Phil?
We got two teams contending for the Mountain West. I think one of these two teams is a contender and the other one's a pretender. The contender, Boise State. You look at their losses this year, they were to UCF by 2 at Memphis. Memphis never loses at home. They lost and won by 3. And then a game where they blew a 3-touchdown lead against Colorado State in the fourth quarter in like the final 6 minutes of the game. Other than that, they're playing extremely well. As you mentioned, a 24-8 first down edge last week, 443 to 112. Look at Fresno. They've got the wins. But the UNLV game last week, they were outgained 237 to 108 at the half. They managed to come out of there somehow with a 7-point win. Still scratching my head how. The previous week against Utah State, outgained at the first half, 256-192. Utah State could have easily beaten them. Wyoming did handle them. And other than that, they played a very weak schedule. Boise's played the tougher schedule. I feel they've got the better defense. Taylon Green should come into his own here. I think Boise's the contender. Fresno's the pretender. I'm going to take Boise plus the 3 to pull the upset here.
All right, Phil, give me your power plays for Week 10. Again, you've been on a heater, 9-3 over the last 4 weeks. What are your favorite picks here for Week 10?
Yeah, let's hope they continue on that way. I'm going to go with Georgia, minus the points over Missouri. I think we get an A game out of Georgia this week, and really a nice win. Alabama -3, it just seems cheap to me. I think the spread should be 6 or 7. And then let's pick a dog. I'm going to go with East Carolina. We talked about them earlier, plus the 17 against Tulane. So one big favorite, one small favorite, and an underdog for you.
I'm a coward. I have no dogs, but I'm going to give you 4 picks. I like Wyoming at home, 7-point favorite, and then 3 road favorites. Nebraska at Michigan State. You talked me into that, Phil. SMU, 12.5 at Rice. They completely destroyed Tulsa, 69-10 last week. They could have hung 100 if they wanted to. And then UCLA laying 3 on the road at Arizona. So no underdogs for me. What about you, Trip?
I really like the over in that Bama LSU game. I think that one's going to hit. I also like the one that Phil brought up later. It's a big number, 70.5, Georgia Southern. I like that one. I really like the over in the USC and Washington game. But just because I feel like I'm agreeing with every pick, if there's one that I will go a little contrarian on, I think Miami will get the win in Raleigh this weekend. I like the Hurricanes.
All right, that'll do it for Week 10. Phil, it's been a pleasure. Follow him on Twitter at PhilSteele042. The Phil Steele Plus live tours on YouTube. That's available now. If you go to X, Twitter, you can find that. More information at PhilSteele.com. Trip Hurd, the Lock Doctor, at Trip Hurd. I'm at Kyle Schass on Twitter. Phil, it's been fun. We have 4 shows, I think, remaining after today. We will come back to the table for Week 11 next Thursday night. Appreciate you as always.
A lot of fun as always. Great talking to you guys again, and let's get some winners this week.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Absolutely. Business end of the schedule. That'll do it for Week 10 on the Phil Steele Show. Bet smarter, not harder. Be more like Phil. Get it wherever you podcast. College Sports Now. We'll catch you next week. Thanks.